So do a little after action report, play through, kind of get some ideas. Practice of the U.S. Civil War by Mark Simonitch. This game, as more and more I play it, face to face and solo, I find is quite good. A lot of very good problem for both sides. Basically, the issue for Union player is really set to win, is that you got to follow a set schedule, as you can see on the turn track. Here with the 2, you need 2 victory points. 4, 6, it's like suggested. And at the end of the round, if the Union player falls back enough, it's an automatic victory for the Confederate player. Kind of sudden death, which kind of happens in this area. And but what's nice, if they do stay on schedule and get all the way up to 64, which is really problematic for the Confederate player, the Confederate player can still win if they keep the Union player at 59 victory points, and they win by 1. Not really win the war, but, as the designer says, but more or less get a better deal than the historical. And the other cool thing about this schedule is the action cycles of every turn. I've marked it for the 4th cycle is not done through 1861. Is the dice differential really can affect the Union player and slow things down. Excuse me. Because if you keep rolling consistently low, you really don't have many options to keep on your schedule. Like one of the things to do early on is to take West Virginia, but if you keep rolling low, you only have 2, or if you have a differential of 1 where you only get 1 action per zone of east, west, and transmiss, you really can't do much to force the Confederate player out of its position. It's all up to the Union player to change that. And the Confederate player, he can slow basically his strategy for this game is to slow the Union assault as much as possible, keep them from gaining, and also creating as much problems like taking up these northern objectives, which really can be problematic. But if you can take one, it really can force the Union player off his schedule. So, but the problem with the Confederate is that they have a huge area with very limited resources to defend a huge area, and the Union player can do a lot of stuff to cause them. Like here, this is completely open. Say if the Union player has Chip Island, they can have options of going to Mobile, invading along Mobile, coming in Mississippi to Columbia, or over to New Orleans, and moving up through this area. And if you've got all your forces in Tennessee, you have to shift away, or even down here in Florida, you got all these objective hexes, and if they just mosey on in through the back, and if the Confederate player has all his resources here in Virginia or Tennessee, you gotta shift quite a bit. So the Union player is to water down, make the Confederate player defend as much as he can, but the Union player needs to be in position to do those actions, because if you don't roll well, you can't get your guys down here and in position to use the options to do that, because of the dice differential that sets the number of actions you can do per turn. And if you're out of position, you get a nice 4 or 5, and you're only here in, say, Tennessee or Virginia, you're quite limited on what you can do. So we'll be playing through this and see how well the Union player can do and how well the Confederate player can hopefully keep one victory point till the bitter end. So this is the status after turn 1. We'll start with a transmiss. Leon came down, pushed out Price out of Springfield, and then Price retreated with his lone SP down to Fayetteville and dug in there. There was a trench already set up there by the militia unit here, and then the last final action cycle was a 1 differential, so 1 action per zone. So the Union took a risk of attacking Fayetteville and defeated Price, killing him. He is now there, but it was a tie and he lost, so he retreated back, Leon, and so he didn't take that hex for a victory, which would have been good. In the west here, nothing a whole lot except the guys that were in Cincinnati used gunboats to come up here to West Virginia as a backup for McClellan, and McClellan came down from Pittsburgh. Turk was it there? Grafton dropped a unit off there and tried to take Charleston from the militia unit, and that was dug in and lost. Well, tied again. He retreated back 1 to the river with that support coming up, and but was demoralized because he's not in supply. Killed the unit, so that's open, but didn't take it. And out here in the east, we had a on to Richmond roll, so McDowell came out and hit Beauregard and lost. Each side lost. Nope. Yeah, it was McDowell lost 1, and but the most important here, Johnson came up here and pushed out Patterson and took Harper's Ferry back. So the Union player is down to 1 victory point, and he's supposed to have 2 after the first turn. So he didn't take a lot of, the Union player didn't take as many objective X's, but they're open and clear, so if he gets the initiative on this first cycle in turn 2, he may, well, no, because there's reinforcements on this turn, so definitely not. And so let's see what turn 2 holds. So this is the end of turn 2. What we have here is this is the status. What is good for the Confederate player is Stuart took Zanesville up here, and the way he did that was he had a unit in Stroudsburg and moved them out here to threaten Gainesville, I think it was, Grafton. And when Grafton, but he went out and attacked here at the militia unit at Wheeling, and since it wasn't dug in, he won it and gained control of Wheeling because West Virginia was still under control, and he was able to run up the railroad and over to Zanesville, because with him threatening here in Maryland, he could have ran up to Pittsburgh, but the Union player moved the two SPs from Cincinnati up to Pittsburgh, garrisoned it, and then after, and luckily, when he took Wheeling, the Confederates won initiative, so he got the first move and was able to do that, to take Zanesville. And then the Union player took Wheeling back because no one was there. And McDowell moved up. Longstreet couldn't reach Wheeling. I didn't have a card to force march him. And what was needed for my other action was down here in Transmiss is Curtis took Fayetteville, pushed that unit out, and I brought an SP up from New Orleans to Little Rock to just kind of cover this for the next position, just in case any craziness. Didn't want him rushing down here for a free take, but couldn't really. But he's now, the Confederate player is now in position to do something. But that's good here. And also the nice thing was Wheeling was controlled, so Stuart didn't have to wasn't out of supply when the Confederate segment. So next turn he's going to be out of supply if he stays, but he's got all these guys to threaten and cause shenanigans. But now West Virginia is controlled by the Union player. And just basic stalemate up here in the east and nothing going on. Oh, the Union player setting up here is he took that hex there for blockade reasons, but I can put units there and they can take the next hex for blockading or surround Jacksonville, push into Florida, cause problems for the Confederate player if he so desires. But also this area forced the Confederate player to garrison the hex in front of New Bern there in the swamp so that he couldn't land any units there. And because if he lands a unit in that swamp, cuts the fort off. So to prevent that, I've got that guy there. Even though the Union player doesn't have any units there per se, he can still run down and knock that out because he's got control of Horatus Inlet. And we'll see what happens in turn 3. So this is the end of turn 3, end of phase. The status we have here, I should remove the demoralizations. A lot of action up here because for 3 straight action cycles was 4s. Very active here. The Union player took back Zanesville. Stuart escaped, but threatened up here, forcing the Union player to do stuff. But these on to Richmond attacks here against Beauregard got pushed back on the last action cycle. Burnside took Harper's Ferry and then tried to attack again and then got forced out of Harper's Ferry on mandatory on to Richmond. So Patterson had to come over and garrison Harper's Ferry to keep from falling back, and Longstreet came up to reinforce instead of forcing the Union player either to attack with Patterson against Longstreet or McClellan against Beauregard, and Union player used card to activate McClellan instead of using 2 action points to cover that. Of course, the Confederates have moved into Kentucky. We have a blocking force there, but you've got Van Dorn was transferred up, so he took Henderson, and Johnson there took Bowling Green, and Bragg took Columbus. So we're going to get 3 cities of Kentucky for Confederates, and with the new upper rules, it's worth 3 instead of 2. Transmiss was quiet. It's kind of stalemated there, but Memphis has got up to level 2, and the Navy was active on this turn. They took you there. Everybody stalemated there. The Navy moved into there, and Ship Island for later operations. But the clincher was they did an amphibious assault on Galveston and lost the naval battle against the militia in a entrenchment on a very poor roll for the Union player with 3 ships against an entrenchment for the naval battle, and the Confederates rolled very well, 6, and the Union player rolled a 1. The worst possible roll for them. So that's the end of turn 3. And we'll see what happens. So this is the end phase of turn 4. So over here, not much has happened in Transmiss area, other than the fact that the Union tried to invade Galveston again, won the naval battle, but lost the assault. Again, rolling 1s does not help. The West here was pretty active. They moved in here and pushed up, but Grant has pushed down and wiped out the units here. But he couldn't take the hex, so actually the guns survived. And what happened with Morgan is that they took Cincinnati but lost the attrition in the winter. Risky, but lost that. And also Stuart did take Harrisburg up here, but also the same turn Morgan lost his attrition due to poor supply. He was taken out. A few eastern here attacks with Burnside, but not much going on there. But also these turns were quite high, 4s and 5 action differential. But over down here in the Gulf, they decided to Union player to land troops there. So next turn with reinforcements, that could pile a ton of guys there, forcing the Confederates to defend this area to prevent him pushing out, which will probably prevent guys being put here up on this front. So we shall see how turn 5, 1860. Well, this is the end of 1862 started on this turn, and we'll start spring of 62. So this is the end of the end phase of turn 5. So over here at the Transmiss, not much has happened at all. Trenches dug up in Springfield. Everybody just sat here about what's important here instead of Union players gotten annoyed with attacking Galveston head on, and Confederates were able to build a fort there. So they decided to land here at Sabine City, and now I have of 3. Union has 3 SPs there. He's got options of taking these ports here and taking control, and then moving up to Nacogdoches and into Louisiana. So the Confederate player is going to have to cover all this. So if he doesn't, I just walk up, guys, and take things. And also it cuts off Houston here and Galveston, so it can do it from the land route. And if I take all the ports in Houston, it kind of kills Galveston. It isolates it. So looks like that way. Yeah. So the west was a little exciting here. So Grant started over here at Columbus and quickly marched over here and took the Confederates, Kirby Smith, that was sitting at Dover, pushed him out, and then walked over and took Clarksville, forcing the Confederate player to basically move everything out of Kentucky down to Nashville, but lost a few guys en route. And then since the river here was completely opened, the Confederates snuck down a amphib landing of a SP using gunboats, forcing Kirby Smith to come down here and try to knock him out and roll poorly. But he also had a -2 on the die roll, being demoralized. Albertson and Johnston's come over here to Buell, who's sitting in Chattanooga. This kind of was a quinky-dink that happened because Buell started up there to take this town here that, not Mill Spring, but London. Or, yeah, London. And he marched down there, came through here and pushed the militia unit out of Knoxville. It wasn't dug in, so it took them out, took control of that, and used rail movement down to Chattanooga because no one was on the rail. And since he knocked the militia out at Knoxville, it was displaced. So it went to the box, and the Virginia moved in here because they could also move within 10 points and come up here. Gonna have to cover Salt, but there's only 2 SPs here, so it's a very skeleton force. Confederates probably can take that back. The east was pretty quiet in the sense that Lee came in and pushed Burnside out of Harper's Ferry, and then also they made where Jackson is at Manassas, he's got a fort there, and the Union player built a fort in Chambers, and so we're just sitting there. Not much on the coast here. But what happened down here is from Ship Island, jumped across and landed at that port. And at the beginning of the term, Strategic moved 3 SPs there and put Thomas there. Thomas moved over to Burlington, and then riverboat transport over to Proctorville with this SP, who came over on Ship Island. And so Thomas is in, which forced the Confederates to put troops into Columbia and Mobile. And but there's only one SP in that fort. It's a level 2 fort, but Beauregard came out of Columbia, came down to support that because Thomas could, if he rolls really high, he can win the battle and force them out, and it would not be good. So he'd take New Orleans, and then the fort would fall. And also Pemberton, because of this guy up here, has come up to support and also deal with this problem. And so we'll see what turn 6 turns out, because the Union player taking these objectives has pretty much saved themselves, but the Confederate still gets the bonus for these Kentucky hexes. Focusing on other things to force the Confederate player to do things that he may not want to. So this is the end of phase of turn 6. Up here in the east, we had one on to Richmond, so Burnside came out and tried to hit Lee and lose 1, but he lost 2. So that was problematic. But need that. And then Stuart moved up here to threaten all these guys again. So that's decent. Over here, which I knew the Confederates were probably going to push Buell out of Chattanooga, which they did. Bragg tried to push him out of Knoxville, but couldn't. He was reinforced by Stoneman, and also I got Rosecrans coming up here. So hopefully you can strengthen that position, but it's basically LOC, but not in supply. Grant was able to take Nashville and then push down a little bit, but tied a battle right there. Hardee in the last move moved up there and entrenched, so he's cutting this river line to these guys down here and Sherman. But all this is completely open other than Memphis, but don't want to lose that. I'm pretty much all quiet down here. This kind of stalemated, other than that it allowed Union player to assault these forts here and take it. So, and then over here in Transmiss, tried to jump the river and attack, but failed. And quiet all the way over there. So this is the end phase for turn 7. Not much has happened in the east, up in northern Virginia, but what happened down here is Hooker took Jacksonville and pushed out all the guys here and started threatening Savannah, so they had to pull everything out, almost everything out of Florida. And I could walk one of the guys from the coast down there to take that. But all quiet here, still stalemated here. And over at Houston, they pushed the guys out, but used my activations for elsewhere, because one big major problem for the Union player was here. Got pushed out of Knoxville because the Confederate player sent Morgan through that gap, who ran up here, tried to remove the LOC unit there. When he couldn't, he just marched down into the gap, cutting off Buell at Knoxville. And then Bragg attacked and won the fight, so Buell had to retreat. And since he couldn't retreat west or north, he had to go east. And caused some major issues. And I have to roll for just supply because he's completely isolated there. And then over here, Wheeler took Columbus, so that should help the Confederate player. Sherman still holding in Corinth. Pope went over and wiped out Hardy that was on the river. And we'll see what happens in turn 8. So this is the end phase of turn 8. What we have here is moving down the river here and threatening Arkansas. Then Thomas actually took Houston, defended this area from some maneuvers by the Confederate player. A lot of stalemate here in the center. And Hooker is continuing his attacks down here in Florida. And again, not much happening up here in the Northern Virginia area. Basically, if things are more threatened, like down here around Knoxville, it burns up all the activations, and you basically can't do certain things in other areas, which makes this game very unique in that respects compared to other Civil War games a little bit. And so we'll see what happens in turn 9. So this is the end of phase of turn 9. So the Union were actually able to take New Orleans there, and they cut off Galveston and took it when the fort surrendered. Tried to break the stalemate up here, but was thwarted. Not much happened there. Kind of stalemated here in Tennessee, other than the cavalry started going all the way up to Kentucky. Now I'll cut everybody off. And Knoxville's kind of stalemated, but also down here in Florida, Burnside actually took out Tallahassee and the Salt, so they're at 2 Salt down. And so it's going to be quite problematic for the Confederate players. Going to start taking maintenance charges, and the East is pretty much stalemated, but Stuart moved out. Gonna try to cause problems because the Union players really got all his space open, but with the reinforcements coming this next turn, it's gonna basically end. But all this cavalry stuff is gonna force the Union player to start burning more activations. And we'll see what happens in turn. So this is the end phase of turn 10. So down here in Transmiss, it's been quiet down here. Up here was a bit of action because Sherman basically surrounded Memphis, and the Union player had ran the guns to put ships down in this port because they were controlling it. The Confederate player came up with Taylor and pushed them out on the last turn. So these guys are all out of supply next turn. Isolated is LOC. And pretty quiet here. The Confederates try to attack Clarendon and didn't do too well. Tried to take on the last turn, tried to sneak a guy over and take a town, but that didn't work. Forrest was sitting in Covington, and Reynolds came across and tried to take him out, and did, but lost the battle, but he killed the unit. And it's pretty quiet over here in the Northern Virginia. And down here in Florida, see, Burnside took out Van Dorn, and this cavalry unit, who's this? Wheeler came down and tried to knock this guy out and lost. And so that's the end of turn 10. So this is the end phase of turn 11. So we'll do down here the Gulf Coast. Sigel marched out of New Orleans and came down this way and took what is this? Brashear City, then moved up, took the Salt, and then took that city there, and Little Rock fell, and Taylor had to move out and cover Arkansas Post, and gave up the port there, and Union took it back and put gunboats down there to cut off Memphis, and Sherman surrounded it, and Buckner tried to attack, and it was a tie. Didn't do much, so. And then Memphis actually surrendered level there, and they also lost one through attrition. And Morgan got wiped out in Clarksville. He came down and took it, but the Union took it back, cleaned that out of Confederate control somewhat, important places, and basically stalemated down here in Florida. But the big thing up here in Northern Virginia, Meade came down here and pushed out of Manassas and got down to Fredericksburg. Lee had to split his force at Harper's Ferry and get down here to cover Richmond, and they wiped out the guys that were at Harper's Ferry and then moved troops up in the rear and took the Shenandoah Valley there on the top. So not looking good for Confederates at this point. Things are starting to bite. But it's the summer of '63, so we'll see how the rest of the year goes. So this was an interesting turn for a couple reasons. Most of the dice differential for 3 action rounds were 1. So it really slowed things down here. So Arkansas was the river has been taken pretty much. They tried to break the siege, which they did on one supply because Memphis almost surrendered. But they got it reformed, but it's tenuous. Grant sat here and bashed his head against these mountains and finally broke through, but then Chattanooga wouldn't fall. Stalemate at Knoxville, but up here used some cards and actions to move Hancock and Banks all the way down here through Virginia because Lee is holding off Meade, but it's pretty thin. And then Hooker came up here and took New Bern from Longstreet, so that was helpful. And it was basically quiet down here in Florida. So things are still slow going for the Union player because everything's kind of spread out. And we'll see what turn 13 they got. The Union players got a mosey on up. I think it's going to be focused on the east. Get Richmond and these, as it is all open right up in here. And because everybody's been fighting here. And so it's looking like thin pickings here. Confederates are going to do some serious digging. So this is the end phase of turn 13. And the most critical thing happened here is Memphis fell to Sherman's direct assault. And over here, they cleaned out eastern Tennessee. That helped the Union player. Wheeler down here took back Tallahassee and tried to get that salt hex there. Didn't work. Burnside got stalled there. But the other important thing is naval attack took the fort here at Wilmington. So this whole northern Atlantic is now blockaded. Everything's quiet up here in Virginia. And that's about it. It's been 2 turns of very low action points. So it just kind of slows the Union advance, but also helps the Confederate player to stall as much as possible. So this is the end phase of turn 14. Things are not going well for the Confederate player. Seems everybody in Tennessee is stuck over here, and we got all the way down to Macomb with Grant. The only person that's in the way is Wheeler, and militia down here in Tallahassee. Burnside's coming up on Savannah. Hooker broke out from Longstreet. Most importantly, Meade took Richmond. A.P. Hill was over there covering from Banks. And not much else is going on. Trans-Mississippi is pretty much quiet. It's still bogged down here, basically, because the Union player hasn't really done much. Yeah, so we'll see what turn 15 happens. So this is the end phase of turn 15. So nothing really happened down here or in the Trans-Mississippi. Actually, things were relatively quiet because low action ratings, so couldn't do too much. The Confederates kind of stalled Grant out here by cutting him off with Jubal early down here. And Lee got pushed further down by Meade up here, took him Petersburg. And then Hooker came out, took that, and Burnside took Charleston and Savannah. So on to turn 16. So this is the status of, end phase of turn 16. Was started off with a lot of actions and then quieted down. You have Curtis tried to take Camden and remove the force, but he lost, so he couldn't take the hex. Siegel here is just marching through, pushing out, but this guy, Breckinridge, came down here, threatened his LLC, and units here in Alexandria did an exchange here with the Union player, so they both don't have units there. But the nice thing is the Confederates can get a guy down here or up there quicker than the Union player. And up here in the east is pretty quiet, other than Norfolk was taken and Lee was wiped out. And the west is fighting over trying to keep the line to Macon and Helena open. Thomas here took out Hood. But basically the Confederate player is down to a group here covering all these hexes and a group over here. And it's dying pretty fast for the Confederates. Let's see if they can hold out. But the Union player is already over 60 right now, victory points. So he's got basically 4 more turns to maintain that above, and the Confederates have lost. I think there's could be the Confederates will call it before actually this is, yeah, actually it's auto victory of 12 over, so actually it ends right here. Just notice that the Union player is over 61, 45 is what he needs, so he's well over 12. So that's game.